Hey everyone, I'm so excited to be here. And guess what? Um, there are no thunderstorms this time in the area, so hopefully this is going to be a good one. Um, so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the messages I'm looking at in the live chat, and people were talking about running out of the main color. So I did talk a little bit about that in my last live. And if you run out a little bit before you're up at the top, just switch over to your color two, and you'll actually have enough of your color two to put a few extra rows up on top, and then also still be able to do the whole border around. So with that, welcome. Hi, I'm Romi. And this is the third video, third live in my Shawl-along. And I did put out a little extra recording last time. And that one, it's also in your little intro file for the Shawl-along. And so hopefully that was helpful. That one was on chart D. So I'm just kind of looking over to the right here just a little bit to make sure that I'm catching your comments. And I'm just going to share my screen with you. Today we're going to talk about how to bind off along the top of the inner triangle and then how to pick up stitches around the inner triangle. So I've knit a little teeny tiny mini shawl just out of chart A. And so I can fit pretty much the whole thing under the camera and you can see what I'm actually doing. So let's just do that. And you can see my little tiny mini shawl here. So today we are going to go over just the transition, and you probably aren't there yet. So, but don't feel bad about that. This is kind of in the middle of this next chunk of stuff that you're going to be doing. So I'm just going to show you this. You can watch it again once you get there, and that will probably refresh your memory. So we're going to bind off with reverse stockinette I-cord. So I love the way that looks because it blends in really nicely with the garter stitch, but it also gives a beautiful firm edge. And back to the firm edge thing, because it is such a firm edge, I always use a larger needle to bind off. So that is where my US 7 double pointed needle comes in. So we're going to be binding off along the top here, all of these stitches, and this needle that's 2 sizes larger than my working needle of a US 5 is going to help keep it nice and loose so that when we block it, it will still block out nice and stretch out really pretty. So you can see here I have all of my loops along the side, and that's where I'm going to end up picking up my stitches. You can see back here, there's my last little loop here. Okay, and then, so I have to cast on a few stitches to start the I-cord bind off. So I always like to put a marker there just so that I don't lose count because sometimes I get distracted and I just want to make sure that I have enough stitches. So I'm going to cast on 4 stitches. And I'm going to use my larger double pointed needle to cast the stitches on because I want to keep it nice and loose all the way across. So I'm going to cast on in the knitted style, and that's literally just knitting a stitch, and then you're going to twist it and put it up on your needle. So that is 1 stitch cast on. And I always leave my needle in the stitch to keep casting on. So I'm going to do 2 stitches, and twisting the stitch here helps it to stay with the right leg in front and the left leg in back. So when you start knitting, you have your stitches properly mounted on the needle. So that is the 4 stitches cast on. Okay, so we are right about here. This is where we are in the instructions. And so I'm going to start by purling two and then purling two together. And I'm just going to look over here and make sure I have everybody in the live chat and people are doing well. Um, okay, so I'm going to purl two. So for that, I need to bring my yarn forward and I'm going to purl one and then purl two. Okay, and then I'm going to purl two together. So those are the last two stitches that I cast on. So what I've actually done is just kind of added a little stitch to make it a little bit wider at the top. I'm just going to take my marker out. Okay, so now I'm keeping my yarn in back and I'm going to slip those stitches back onto my needle. So it looks pretty messy so far, but it will look really nice after a while, I promise. So now here's my yarn. It's coming out the back. I'm going to bring it around in front. So I don't go over the top because that would make a yarn over. This is actually part of the I-cord here. So I've brought it around in front and now I'm going to knit two stitches. And if you want to pull that a little bit tight, if that's okay, you have enough leeway to do that. So that's my, I'm sorry, purl two stitches and then purl two together. Okay, so that's what I have so far, still pretty messy. I'm going to put those back onto my needle. And then again, the yarn is going to come around to the front. I'm going to purl two. I'm going to give it a little tug and then purl two together. Okay, and then I'm just going to kind of whip through this. So it might get a little boring for you to keep watching me do this, but you can see how it's going to grow from something that looks kind of lumpy and misshapen, and it's going to grow into something that looks like an actual tube as we go along. And the really cool thing, well, one of the cool things about this bind off is that when you're blocking your shawl, you can actually put a blocking wire right through the center of the tube, and you can get a really nice straight edge up top from that blocking wire. So I'm just going to kind of keep going along here. Also, I think I saw another question about the yarn and running out. Um, this type of shawl construction is really forgiving. So as long as you end up with the correct number of stitches around the side, if you decide you want to make the inside a little bit shorter, you can you can do everything that you need to do, pick up however many stitches you have in the yarn overs around the side, and you'll be fine with that. I did also want to add that I'm actually binding this off with my master color and not the contrast color. So this takes a lot of yarn. So this is a one color version of it. So in the pattern, you'll be binding this off with your contrast color, but I'm binding it off with my master color. So across the top, you're going to have a little stripe of your contrast color going across. And then once you're on the side, you'll be picking up the stitches again with your contrast color going around. So you can see now that this is starting to look like a nice little tube. So if you would kind of turn over now, so right along here, this is the yarn that I'm pulling around the back in order to do my I cord. And when I stretch it out like this, it's still nice and stretchy. And around the back, you can see how it's actually looking like a tube and it's not looking as sloppy as it used to be. So let me just whip through this and I will show you how to pick up the stitches going around. I'm going to kind of take another look over to the side and make sure I'm getting everybody's chat. Oh, yay. Donnie, I'm so glad that this is working for you. Yay. I'm so glad. I love the reverse I cord because it's it has such a cool kind of a pearled look to it. So it goes along, it goes really, really well with a garter stitch. So it kind of just sinks back into the background. So if you take a look at the top here with all that garter stitch, yes. Donnie says it'll look great in the contrast color, and I love it in the contrast color. It gives a really nice little border to it. It looks really beautiful. So I hope you all will love it as much as I do. Um, it also, when you're wearing the shawl, it doesn't get stretched out along the neckline as much as just a plain garter stitch bind off across the top might do. So it gives it a lot of extra weight in there. And I love using this method. So here we go. Just grabbing some more yarn. So the yarn that I'm using right here is a wool, and it's just a superwash wool that I did a little sample on. So as you're knitting, if you're using the bamboo, you're probably going to see that it looks a little bit sloppier at first, but it blocks out really beautifully. So even though it's not going to look quite as nice as wool while you're doing it because wool stretches out in your hands and it makes the stitches look more even. So here we go. It's probably about as interesting as watching paint dry right now. Like that's what my husband would say. He'd be like, oh my gosh, you're just knitting. That's really okay. Anyway, let me take another look over at the chat and see how everybody's doing. Yay, Corrine said the bind off worked, and she used wool and a US 8 double pointed needle. That's awesome. This also, some types of bind offs, when you do a long edge like this and it's kind of loose, you'll notice that there's a little bit of fluting up at the top and it sort of wrinkles, it gets a little bit bent out of shape. But this really keeps its shape beautifully. So if you've done any of my other shawls, I often use this one. And I think the first time that I used it was for the Brandywine shawl, which was forever and ever and ever ago, long ago. So sometimes I also use just a plain I-cord, and that one is nice too, but it does tend to curl a little bit more, in my opinion, than the reverse stockinette. I usually put a few rows of garter stitch. If I put the reverse stockinette I-cord onto the center part of any shawl, I will always put a little bit of garter stitch under it to make sure that it's not curving up and just curling around. So let's take another look here. Just going to slip these back. So now you can see this is the part that I stretched out over at the beginning here. And then you can see how that looks really loose and kind of sloppy right now. If I just give it a nice pull, it really evens out a lot. So if you're going along and you feel like it's just looking too sloppy, just give it a nice pull and see how it is really looking. So it is really difficult to cast off too loose when you're doing something in a larger gauge like this than the ball band states, and it's a shawl, but it can be done. I have seen people cast off too loose before. So you can either stretch it out, or sometimes I also like to just kind of hit everything with steam and stretch it out a little bit to make sure that everything is working out. So as I'm getting to the end, let me take a look. I think everybody is looking good. Oh, and then Quilt Piece was talking about my Musings of Sunlight shawl. And yes, this is exactly the same um, bind off that I used across the top. I love this bind off. So it's used on a lot of my shawls. And yeah, if you like it here, then there are lots of other patterns to try it out on. So I would not, however, use this necessarily on the bottom of a shawl. Um, you just have to be really careful and make sure that if you're using it to bind off of the whole shawl, that this will be loose enough to spread it all out. So that's the only thing, just kind of keep an eye, make sure. I do actually know a couple of people who love to use this as their final bind off. So it can be done. Almost to the end here. Thanks for being patient with me. So I have one more stitch. Okay. That was my last stitch. Woohoo! Okay. So I do want to call your attention to this last stitch that I knit here. That one is one of the yarn overs. So that little stitch up top here is one of the yarn overs that I'm going to pick up stitches in. So you don't want to let that get lost. So now I'm going to slip my stitches back onto my needle. Okay, so I'm almost ready here. And let's see. So Corinne said that her wool yarn is very stretchy, and the seven seemed right or seemed tight. Okay. So absolutely go ahead and use a larger double pointed needle. All of us have a slightly different style of knitting. So I knit a little bit looser maybe than you do. So definitely go up if you feel like it's too tight. Yeah. Okay, so here we are. So we've gone all the way down to the end, and then I just placed my remaining 3 stitches back on the left needle, and then I'm going to bring the yarn around in front. I'm sorry, I brought it around the back to the front. And I'm going to use my working needle now, and I'm going to knit 2 together and knit 1 through the back loop, and so I can get ready to work the transition. So I am about to knit the 2 stitches together here, and then knit 1 through the back loop. So now that I've done that, that is my start for picking up all the stitches around the side. So you can take a look here and see that that one little yarn over here that was the last stitch is a little bit difficult to see. So you're going to want to maybe mark it or something to make sure that it doesn't get lost in there. Okay, so now I am at row 1. So with right side facing and 2 stitches already on right hand needle, which is these 2 stitches, I'm going to pick up the stitches around the triangle by doing a yarn over and then pick up and knit one in each loop alongside the triangle. So in this particular case, I only did chart A, and that has only 17 yarn overs along the side. So I'm just going to be picking up the 17, and I'm going to start up at the top here, making sure that I get that yarn over. So I'm going to yarn over and then pick up and knit a stitch, yarn over, pick up and knit a stitch. So you can see I'm just going straight through the center of each of those yarn overs. So there's a twist on the side here. Don't pick anything up through that twist. You're just going to be picking up straight through the center of that yarn over loop. And there's a yarn over in between each one of them. I'm just going to scoot along here. And then when I get to the bottom, sometimes there's a little bit of an issue trying to figure out that last yarn over. So I often just count to make sure that everything is okay. So just going along here. So sometimes the cast on is a little bit confusing because of how the stitches lay. So I want to make sure that I am picking up in the right place. Okay. So I just want to kind of take a look at this yarn over here. Okay, so here's what I was talking about. Right near the cast on here, and I can tell it's a cast on loop because I have my pin in the loop. I believe that this little loopy thing here is actually one of the stitches that goes through the cast on loop, but I'm just going to make sure by counting. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Yes. So again, I have picked up stitches in all of my 17 loops. And down here, this one that was sort of masquerading as a loop is actually just a stitch. So if I sort of pull this here, I can see that it's a stitch that goes into the cast on loop there, and I'm not going to be picking up a stitch through that particular loopy stitch there. So now that I have all of my stitches picked up in my loops, on the full size shawl, you would be doing this with the contrast color, and also you would be doing this into 100 loops. So when you get down to this area here, make sure that you do actually have the 100 loops picked up along here. And if you only have 99, go ahead and just pick up that last loop that you see. Okay, so here we are. We are down, let's see. We are at the cast on loop. So I'm going to yarn over, and then I'm going to place a marker. And I always just place a marker to kind of keep track of what the center stitch is, where it is, because somehow I always lose it. So I'm just going to put my marker there. And then I'm not going to worry about the fact that this is kind of loopy. I'm just going to sort of pull that a little bit, and I will definitely be adjusting that. Like when I block my shawl and when I am putting my, when I'm weaving in my ends and everything, I will make sure that that loop looks really nice. So I'm not going to bother with it too much right now. I'm going to place another marker and then another yarn over. And I still have that stitch marker in there into that loop that I cast on into. And now I'm going to start picking up stitches along the other side. So again, it's hard to miss the yarn overs along the side, but definitely make sure that you get all of them because it will be really obvious along the side of the shawl if you don't get all of them. And the yarn overs are going to give you slightly too many stitches. So I always make sure after a couple of rows to decrease some of the stitches out. But I think that it looks really nice um, picking one stitch up in each yarn over with the yarn overs in between. It makes it really pretty and lacy. So I don't like to mess with that pattern, and that's why I decrease out later. Okay, so here I am up at the top, and again, I'm just going to count and make sure that I don't pick up any extra stitches. So back here, here is my pin. I'm not going to count that one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So this one is a yarn over that I want to pick up a stitch through. I just wanted to make sure before I did that. Okay, so then I'm going to yarn over. And then in this little bit of a cast on here, I'm just going to pick up 2 stitches as best I can so that they'll look really pretty. So looks are the most important thing to me. So I'm right here and I'm about to pick up and knit 2 stitches into the bind off. So that's what I mean by the bind off. It's right here where I have started my bind off and I cast on the 4 stitches. So the most important thing I think is getting it straight across the top. So I'm going to make sure that I get it straight across the top. And I actually really like twisting my stitches when I pick them up because that kind of closes the bottom of the stitch and makes it look neater. So I think I'm going to just twist that around and make sure I have the bottom looking really neat. Okay, so that is all of my stitches picked up around my little tiny mini shawl. I'm gonna see how everybody's doing over here. It looks like you're all doing well. And I have a yarn tangle here because you know that's what yarn does sometimes. Um, so I'm just gonna get this undone because it always has to happen when I'm on live. You know how that goes. So I'm just going to get this apart and then I will talk a little bit more about the next row. Okay. Alrighty. So here we are. Um, the next row here, we're going to be making the front look nice. So here's the back. And what I'm going to do now is knit 2 through the back loop. And then each yarn over is going to get a knit 1. And each of the stitches that I knit into one of the loops that went around the side, that is going to be knit through the back loop because it looks nice and tidy. So I'm just going to go knit 1 through the back loop and then knit 1 through the back loop. Okay, so now I am right here at the knit 1. So I'm going to do knit 1 through the back loop. So that is knit 1 through the yarn over and then 1 through the back loop. And so when I knit through the back loop, I am tidying up the base of each stitch so it's twisted. And I'm still not decreasing anything out. So I'm still going around, not decreasing out any stitches yet. because it's so far it's too obvious. I haven't gotten to a point where I can kind of hide the decreases yet. So I'm going to be knit through the back loop, knit one through the back loop. See how everybody's doing. Everybody looks like you're doing okay. If anybody has any questions, I am more than happy to answer anything. Any questions at all? So let me show you what this looks like if I were going to be throwing my yarn using my right hand, which I'm terrible at. So I would be knitting, and then I would knit through the back loop. So you're twisting the base of the stitch. So that's what it looks like when you're throwing. I am very slow at throwing because I can't lever the yarn. So in the interest of speed, I'm just going to go back to my continental style, just so I can show you what this looks like when I get to the end. And you can take a look on the other side and see how nice this looks. It gives you a little bit of a ridge along the side, and it just looks like it's really lacy, which I love. Okay. So it's still sunny here, which is really nice because no lightning strikes this time. Okay. So that is the end of the row there. When I turn it over, so now you can see how nice that looks. Just looks really lacy and pretty. And like I was saying before, I'm just going to wait until I am completely finished with my shawl. And then I'm just going to adjust this little cast on yarn over here. And I will take my tail from my cast on and weave it in or sew it in so that it looks nice and it just disappears into this really pretty open lacy part. So let's see. I'm looking at, I just want to make sure everything's okay. Jennifer asked, knit one into the yarn over knit one TBL in picked up stitches. Yes. So, so I'll be knitting, so I don't want to close up the bottom of the yarn over. So I want the yarn over in between each of my picked up stitches to be nice and open. So I haven't knit that through the back loop. So if I knit everything through the back loop on the wrong side, these yarn overs would get closed up. So I've just knit those plain. You can see here it's a little bit wider here. So that shows it's not twisted stitch, it's nice and open. And then these stitches that I picked up into the yarn overs that were around the triangle, those stitches that I picked up in the existing yarn overs, those are the ones that are knit through the back loop. So you can see on this side, here's the yarn over, I knit into it. Here's the stitch picked up into the existing yarn over. And this stitch, if you look at the base here, there's a little bit of a twist at the bottom. So I think I got that. Okay. Okay, so now we're on row 3, and this is a decrease row. So because the stitch count is is not correct on my little mini shawl. I'm just going to show you how the decreases look. And what we're going to do is knit one through the back loop 2 times, yarn over, and then knit one through the back loop, knit one, and then knit 2 together through the back loop. So that's just easier. It's kind of like an SSK. It's an opposite leaning decrease to a knit 2 together. And because it twists the stitches, it looks pretty tidy. So I'm just going to knit one through the back loop, knit one through the back loop, and then I have a yarn over. Okay, so I am knitting one. Oops, sorry. I'm knitting one through the back loop. So those stitches that I did not twist before, now they're getting twisted. So that's knit through the back loop and then knit one. And now I'm going to knit 2 together through the back loop, and it's going to twist 2 stitches together. So I'm going to put my needle in through the back loop of both of those stitches. You can see they're going through both of the stitches, and then pull my yarn through. And then you can tell which ones are going to be knit through the back loop, because if I show you this, it's kind of open at the base there, and it needs to be tidied up. So I'm going to knit one through the back loop, knit one, and then knit 2 together through the back loop. Okay, knit one through the back loop, one, and knit 2 together through the back loop. Okay, I'm going to show you what that looks like when I'm throwing. So I'm going to knit one through the back loop, then I'm going to knit one, then I'm going to put my needle in through the back of 2 stitches, and then knit those 2 stitches together through the back loop. Okay, so knit one through the back loop, knit one, and knit 2 together through the back loop. Okay, and that's what it's looking like. You can see that it's a little bit, the decreases are a little hidden in there, and they're not as obvious if I had decreased earlier, and I would have had to contend with all of these little yarn overs in here. Now it looks really even and open and lacy. So that was what I was trying for with that. So let's see how everybody's doing over there. Okay, so that's our transition. And next week, we are going to get to the edging. So just going to go forward just a little tiny bit and talk about that in case you get a little bit, in case you're going a little bit faster. So I will be talking about this next week again, so don't worry. There will be way more on this. So the edging of the shawl is knit at a 90-degree angle to the body stitches. So in other words, you're going to be knitting it back and forth along the body. And each time you get to the body stitches, you're going to be knitting one body stitch together with one stitch from the edging. So it's going to be going straight along. Your body stitches are right along on your needle, and then you're going to be going back and forth, and it's going to be it's called a knitted on edging, and it's used a lot in lace. And one of the really cool things about it is that it keeps you from binding off too tight. And I'm just going to grab my finished shawl here. So you can kind of see along the side here. Um, this is a reversible shawl, by the way. So the only difference is on the right side here, there's a little chain of stitches that goes along the side, and that is created by working one stitch from the body here to the edging as we go along and bind it off. And you're going to be going back and forth along the way. So it's really fun. I love doing them. And I'm just going to show you what the top bind off looks like after it's blocked. So that's what you all are going to be doing pretty soon if you haven't already. And let's see. Oh, Kathy, I anticipated you before I read your message asking me to show what it looks like on the real shawl. So here is the bind off along the top. And then over here on the side, you can see how I picked up in the second color, the contrast color. I was picking up all the way around in each one of the yarn overs. So I just wanted to stress again, make sure you catch every one of the yarn overs because it's really obvious if you miss one of them. So the cool thing is that they're pretty easy to see, so it is actually hard to miss a yarn over, but it is possible because I've done it before. So make sure that you do actually get every single one of those yarn overs. And let me show you what the bottom point looks like here. So mine does not look perfect on the bottom point here, but it does look stretched out enough so that unless you're looking really close for it, you can't really actually notice that that it looks a little funky down here. So here is my cast on loop right at the bottom here. And I sort of pulled that open a little bit more. And then on the back side, I just sewed in the ends here. So you can actually still kind of see the end because it popped out. So that's what that looks like. One of the cool things about this edging is with lace, it's really stretchy, so it stretches around the corner really nicely at the bottom point. And in the pattern, you'll notice that there are some extra stitches right along the area in the point, and that's to help your edging stretch perfectly around the corner. And if you do actually get ahead and you're doing your edging, you'll notice before it's blocked, there's a little bit of a hump here at the bottom, and that will block out, however. So don't worry about that. It will block out. My favorite saying. So let me see. Okay, I think so far so good. So I'm just going to go back and say hi. Um, so when you start the edging, this the other super cool thing about this edging is you can actually weigh your yarn and make sure that you're not using too much yarn when you're doing the edging. So I always suggest weighing your yarn before you do one repeat of the edging and then weigh it after the repeat. So you're just going to make sure that you have enough yarn to do the repeat all the way around. And you should have more than enough yarn to do this because I ended with a lot of extra yarn when I did my shawl. So there was extra in there. I always like to put extra in there for knitted on edging because of some issues that I've had in the past. So definitely want to weigh it. And then there are things you can do in case you are actually that you think you're going to run out of yarn. And I'm just going to go over that just a little bit in case some of you get ahead and you're just like, oh my God, I'm going to run out of yarn. So my favorite thing to do is to alternate rows with a smaller double-pointed needle than your working needle. So for instance, if you find out from doing one repeat that you're not going to have enough yarn, you can alternate with a size 4 double-pointed needle and the size 5 needle and save some yarn that way. So I wouldn't even bother really undoing that first repeat because it's so very difficult to tell the difference between the just using the 5 working needle and using a 5 and a 4. You won't really be able to tell at all, and yet somehow it saves you a lot of yarn. So that works really well. And let me see, I just want to make sure. Let's see. Oh, and Jennifer, who is the dyer of the beautiful bamboo yarn that I used, she says there are some extra kits at Longmont Yarn Shop right now. So that's awesome. Okay, and I am just taking a look here. I think I have everything. So I am so happy that you all could join me. And I hope you'll join me next week at 4 Pacific. So I'm going to be going over the edging. And then the last one is going to happen when you're probably about halfway through your edging. But I'm going to go over how to block the shawl and how to kind of make that cast on loop look really nice and how you would want to weave in your ends and sew them in for bamboo. So thank you so much. If you have any other questions or anything and you would like me to go over something else, I am really happy just to go ahead and record another little tiny YouTube segment and I can stick that up. And other than that, feel free to reach out and ask me questions and I will get back to you as soon as possible. And I will see you all next week. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye bye.